Thank you, Frank. Should we start with the short question or any point that you want to ask Frank to clarify before I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to 10 minutes to make a reflection. Any question? Any short clarification that you want to ask? Hugh? You still can
You have to unmute.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay. Frank, I don't understand that last chart you put up there. I've thought about it, but I don't understand where all these arrows are pointing to and what the logic of it is. So,
well, that's a whole other topic. I was hoping to avoid that. That's begins with work that I started in 1995, and that's 4 levels of evaluation that I posited as providing a complete evaluation. Normally, we begin with a technical level. Did something work? Right? That's what the policy analyst is asked to do.
Yeah.
Right? But then the question is, did the standards that he or she used to determine that apply to the particular social situation, the context? You could say, yeah, I know this, but it's not relevant here.
Yeah, I get that. Yep.
You have to shift to see if this assessment, what it means for the general social or socio-political system. In other words, if we follow this conclusion, does this have detrimental effects on the social system? Let's say affirmative action. Okay, now they say this, we said it was good, now they say it undercuts whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then the final question is, what are the values of that system? And how do we critique them? This would be sort of the classic critical theory. Political theory.
I guess, Frank, the thing that I'm confused about is the arrows. I don't understand why the arrows are like the arrows.
Oh, well, that's a good question. You could, if you want to find another way, make it circular or something. I have no problem with it. I do it this way because I was teaching people to be policy analysts, and they start here at technical.
Yeah.
Like
but then you go
zero.
right to then you don't go right to conclusion from technical. That part throws me off.
Empirical from concrete to abstract. What part throws you off?
Well, I mean, down there at the bottom, where you have technical, then you immediately point off to the right to conclusion, and that.
Oh no, that's in the conclusion of the empirical analysis. In other words, I'm the analyst. I collect data. I hold the data up against a standard, and I make a conclusion. Did it meet the standard?
Oh, okay.
In this limited scheme. Well, I don't.
Okay.
I'm not looking at it. I don't see them.
Yeah. But I understand my confusion a little bit better, but I'm still confused. Okay, there we go.
I mean, I could give you a case study, but let's come back to that.
Or we can skip it and get on to other people's questions.
Well, it's all laid out in chapter 2, applied to COVID policy.
Yeah, no, that was a good example. I did read that.
Okay.
I'm just showing off by the arrows.
Yeah, Jennifer, please.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could just speak for a couple of minutes about, you end the chapter saying that we have 2 main tasks that we really need to focus on as critical and interpretive scholars around the critique of positivism, but also deliberative policymaking. So could you say a bit more about deliberative policymaking? Because I want to raise some questions about the limits of that, and I think it'd be helpful to have you speak a little bit about the prescription for doing more deliberative policymaking to sort of set that up for the
that's a complicated question. The way, I mean, the latter part about deliberative policy analysis, if that's what you want me to speak about,
Yeah.
then I can skip the first part.
Yes. Yes. You can skip the first part because I think you've covered that sufficiently.
Okay, so deliberative policy analysis, as you know, emerged thanks to a book by Martin Heyer and Henk Wagener, and became connected to the argumentative turn, because it's kind of obvious that one argues, deliberates about policy, although argumentation doesn't have to be deliberative. But as an ideal standard, in this perspective, it should be reasoned deliberatively. But what did I wanted to add? So what is, and it was then connected to deliberative democracy. But these are all theoretical connections. And what do I need to say about, give me another cue. What do you want me to, deliberative policy analysis is largely theoretical. There are people who practice it. In some cases, they've actually manipulated it in a way that doesn't make it very deliberative. In other words, there is a large group of people who do this in China, curiously, but they threw out the basic participatory requirements, which then it turns it into a sort of managerial thing. I mean, deliberation is not unusual. It's a question of how far we extend it. They deliberate in the boardroom, right?
Could I ask a follow-up question?
Susan want to jump in, Frank? Is that okay? Susan, please.
Yeah, I just want to ask whether you're addressing this to social scientists, which, who do policy analysis, or you're actually addressing it to political actors, because their methods are not empirical, and I'm not even sure they listen to policy analysts of either the positivist or the post-positivist kind. They do what they do.
Yes, exactly right. In a way, I would argue that we are trying to figure out what they do instead of implying some academic framework on them, which they don't do. Although, I mean, policy analysis is in pretty bad shape today because we are in the post-truth world, and its value is it's devalued. And but it is, we could step outside of government bureaucracy and see that lots of social movements do this or something similar. Now, they don't use this step-like thing, right? But I'm arguing that you can find these components in what they do. If you reconstructed the way they argue, you will find these elements. That's my claim. If that's not true, we can just finish here. But okay, well, I mean, one, there's an academic interest here in trying to figure out how it works. What do we do? It's clear that what we teach, what is taught as policy analysis, is very technocratic, very ideological, and usually not used by government administrators. This we know, right? But it's also available to people who want to make counter arguments, countering the decisions that are made by those government agencies. And that's part and parcel of the political process. So,
Well, I guess the question, Frank, I'm asking is, now that we are in a post-truth situation, how do we address it within your framework?
Well, it is a counter, a process of counter, I was going to say counter argumentation, but you can then object to that because they don't even, well, see, I think, I mean, they do make arguments among themselves. It's not that there are no arguments, it's that their arguments are usually specious. And our job is to illustrate, to take apart, to show what's wrong. Now, this is involved with a play of power. So to show that they're wrong doesn't mean they change. But the struggle goes on over time. This is another question, but it's an important one, of how change comes about. The forces on the outside continue to argue. You don't say, oh, well, we lost, we'll pack up, we'll go home, we won't come back. We reframe our strategy, we make new arguments, we continue. A better question today, in some ways, is where are those counter arguments? Everybody seems to be shying away from criticizing the king. Yeah, so I would say that the advantages of the argumentative perspective is to take apart their arguments. I don't know that we can do more than that, but I think that on academic grounds is already justifiable. I mean, that's what we tried to do. We tried to explain the world, and that includes trying to explain what they're doing, I would say. And in the book on post-truth, I try to show how they actually manipulate these very ideas. They manipulate what otherwise could be called the sociology of knowledge to present alternative realities. In fact, that's what they call them. We call it fake news.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an adequate answer, but what I would say
I
first.
saw Danniel in hands.
I would love to draw on Susan's question, because I think this is the $1 million question. We are actually struggling a lot to deal with myths, with these alternative facts, as you put, like, and it seems very striking that policymakers and politicians appear not to be aware that democracy is a myth, is a belief as well, that we have been living the democratic dream or the democratic reality, the modern democracy, for just a few hundred years. And this is almost nothing in history. And that we can only have democracy when people believe on democracy. And looking at what critical policy inquiry can bring to us, but at the same time at how policymakers and politicians try to deal with myths as if they were just a matter of disinformation, of putting reality back and bringing back good information. I would say that the comparison to that would be that nobody would go to a church to say, hey, no woman can give birth if she's virgin, or that it's impossible that Eva came from the ribs of Adam, because we know from evolutionary perspective that men and women evolved together from the apes. Like, nobody would do that. So why do we face the Pizzagate? Why do we face QAnon? Why do we face anti-vaxxers, which are similar myths to religious myths, as if they were just a matter of better information? And how can we make policymakers and politicians aware that what we are defending is a myth as well, is the democratic belief, is like what sustains our institutions, and make academics as well be aware that institutions, they do not reproduce by themselves, that the people who are there can use these institutions if they are not, let's say, keen on democratic theory, on the democratic dream, or the belief on a democratic society. They can use the same institutions to destroy democracy. How can we, using critical policy inquiry. Do this shift of perception on people so that they understand the need to be critical and engage differently with other myths and not see them as just a matter of information and of truth or falseness.
Difficult question. It's clear that it's not just a matter of better information, which has been an approach to this post-truth problem. I think what we have to see is the post-truth problem is a function of deliberate misinformation campaigns on the part of the right, the conservative ultra-right, who developed this while we weren't looking, and that it requires different leaders to tell people a different story. In that regard, it's not something that policy analysis can do, but it's something that policy analysis could support. In other words, an alternative politics. We do not get out of this until we develop or a alternative political movement becomes strong enough to take power. And then I think this is a way of understanding what's going on in the argumentative processes inherent to this struggle. The key word I would say is struggle. For policy analysis, it's devastating. It's a fundamental, the post-truth challenge is a fundamental challenge to the very basis of what emerged as policy analysis. And in a certain sense, as long as this continues, we could just fold up shop. However, there are traditions, there are values that people like us are beholden to maintain, to preserve, even if it's for a future time. That may be the case. We may not have much to say at the moment. Our hope is that there will be a future time.
You're completely right, Frank, because thinking about how what you call the right, but I think one can't just call it the right, but analyze who these people really are and what interests they represent, but that they had all these think tanks percolating all this time and yes. Figuring out Agenda 2025 and all that. And maybe that's what we've got to do also, is come up with a sort of counter set of ideas.
We have these, but they're very weak by comparison. While we were sleeping, over a couple of decades, they massively funded these think tanks, and these think tanks developed these alternative arguments and the mythology that would seem to support them. It's exactly, I mean, there's this hidden world that behind all of this, that's generating this out. And the most devastating, but the most apparent one is the one you mentioned, 2025, Project 2025. And we're seeing this being put into action, despite Trump's initial claim that he knew nothing about it. Of course, he claims he knows nothing about anything. I agree completely. We have to be in a counter political mode here. We are in the opposition, and I mean, I'm speaking about the United States here, of course, but I guess so are you. We do not have politicians that are willing to step outside of the existing game. Schumer, the example of Schumer is a classic, right? He continued against this enormous threat to the very existence of the system as we know it to respond as if it was just a kind of policy question. What we need, actually, are people like more Bernie Sanders. The truth is, the man is willing to say what's going on. But the Democratic Party has not arrived there yet.
And Frank, which paths do you see that critical policy thinking can open to revive this passions in favor of democracy, of equality, of justice? Like how do you see that critical policy will contribute to that? Which paths are open with it?
I wouldn't say it's a path. We don't have this power, but we can diffuse the false arguments. And that is part of the process. It might not be very satisfying, but I'm not sure what else we can do. But to work with progressive politicians who are willing to stick their necks out and fight the kind of repressive politics that are coming this way. It's not in the purview of an academic field to make a radical change. Although I have to say, with embarrassment, when I was a young PhD, we did sort of think that we could change the world for better, but this was a misunderstanding. And we went from one conservative movement to the other.
Can I push back on that a little bit? Because I wonder if it's actually a call toward more activism from academics to align with social groups who are actually taking action, doing direct action. And
I would agree with that. I didn't say that. I didn't think of that in response to the question, but I would completely support that argument. That's we can become actors. The question then is what, although Danniel's question would be, I think, what do our tools contribute to that? But I think there's an answer to that too. The alternative also, I mean, they have Project 25, we need Project 2025 for another world. And this requires policy thinking. It involves.
I think there are lots of, go ahead.
Go ahead. You.
I think there are lots of discussions about that happening. You know, Robin Kimmerer just came out with a book that talks about the gift economy as a different way of organizing social relations from a Native American point of view. And there are lots of conversations and foundations around how to reorganize the political economy. And there are lots of social groups who are taking action. So I think the real question is, how do those groups come together to bring some kind of unity to that conversation that people can get behind?
Yes, actually, you're right.
A matter of disorganization, I think.
There is no shortage of alternative ideas, but they're spread around, they're fragmented. We do not have a kind of collective organization that's able to counter the collective organization of the right. They pulled themselves together in a massive way. And this has been going on slowly, at least since Reagan, through Gingrich, through the Tea Party, to Trump. And when they weren't in power, they were working away in their think tanks on the margins. And to some degree, we conveniently marginalize them as unimportant. But to take your point, they somehow came together, all these things came together, and they came to power with Donald Trump.
Well, you know, I think
what remains, to what degree is Trump, is he just the figurehead for these other people behind the scenes, or is he actually a prime mover? I think the former is true.
So we're focusing on the United States, but thinking of Europe, excuse me, we've seen, in fact, the collapse of the social democratic consensus that was around so long. And it isn't as if there's a Trump in Europe, but there's certainly the rise of the right, the AfD in Germany, whatever they call themselves in England, Farage's group, and that it isn't that there, or maybe there has been a comparable work on the right of coming up with an agenda, but we see this not just in the United States.
Right. I would say that social democracy is in trouble here in Germany, but it hasn't collapsed. In fact, one of the arguments now that's presented as a kind of contradiction is that Friedrich Merz, because he needs the SPD, will have to adopt a lot of the old SPD programs to establish his coalition. This is not so impressive, but it's not dead. And there's nobody, there's, I would say the AfD is getting bigger, but it's still outside. And the real question is, what will happen in this country, Germany, in 4 years? If the coalition doesn't address the conditions that drive these people into the AfD, then the AfD will be part of the government in 4 years. It's a threat, but they have some time to do this. They do indeed have think tanks. Actually, Danniel has studied these things, particularly in France, the Identitaire and so forth, and how they develop their arguments and counter responses. In France, it's still not Le Pen, and Starmer is in charge in the UK. The threat is definitely there, but they haven't taken over yet. In the United States, they took over the power.
Well, and that's the importance,
to
go back to Weber, that's the importance of the charismatic leader.
That's the importance of the charismatic leader, coupled with massive disinformation. I mean, these people get their information from the social media, which is very thin. They don't read papers. They don't even watch well, they watch Fox News. But there's a massive propaganda campaign underway in the United States. It's not so strong here in Germany. It's on the fringes still. I would say most people laugh when they hear these things, but they have to be careful because we did that too. We laughed, sort of wrote them off as crazy people. Yeah, we're into a strange new territory here, especially for America.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit, because I think what you're saying is that, yes, we can use the tools of interpretive and critical policy analysis to understand that kind of crazy language that you're talking about.
Somebody's knocking at the door. Hold this point, Jennifer, 1 second.
Okay, sure. I'll pause.
Somebody's knocking at my door. I think they want to let the cat in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jennifer, you said that you may need to leave earlier. Is that true?
Yeah, I could stay till 11:30, and then I have another meeting I need to get to. Yeah, I did prepare some formal comments, but I don't know if you want to just continue
You already
conversation as it's going.
It's good to know. I just want to make sure that you guys have a chance to share your thoughts. So how about that? We move a little bit from chit chat to the very serious reflection. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. Frank, everyone
I
have
thought
something
serious
to
reflection. I missed something.
Okay,
well,
yeah, we already agreed that everyone can
it was Jennifer's question. I cut her off because of the katze.
Well,
last question from Jennifer, and then we're gonna be a kind of reflection, eat by eat. Okay.
Okay. So I wanted to, it sounds like what you're saying is that the tools of critical policy studies are actually quite useful right now for understanding the kinds of dynamics that occur under post-truth. So instead of laughing that off as a joke, let's look at that seriously and see what that's doing. And I know you've done that work. But picking up on Daniel's question, I wonder actually if we need to be rethinking our tools right now and developing our tools in a different way to meet the moment. And so, for example, I've become sort of obsessed right now with trying to understand points of leverage that we have to help us get through this moment. And it's not divorced from the kinds of tools that we've developed and that we've used, but I think we have to also start thinking in ways that are different to help us not only understand the political moment, but also to identify ways in which we can maybe get through it without totally losing democracy. And what role can we play as scholars and academics in identifying points of leverage? And so that's something that I've been thinking quite a lot about. And I'm just wondering what your reflections might be along those lines. Do we need to actually adapt as critical scholars in order to grasp the moment, to understand why Chuck Schumer is stuck in an old way of thinking, for example, and what are the ways in which we can kind of get beyond that, not just in terms of understanding meaning, but also institutions, broader kind of political dynamics, economics, because all of these things are kind of being thrown into the mix right now.
Yeah, that is a turn to reflection, whatever Piyapong has in mind there.
Yeah.
You want to
Big
start,
question.
Jennifer?
I think that we are waiting, and I think it's coming, a fundamental breakdown, a crisis, and that people will start protesting. I would give this till summer, when the weather's good, and maybe Social Security checks stop coming. I think that this will wake people up. We can identify openings for critical movements, but we cannot do this on our own. Somebody has to pick this up and has to move it. It has to be political actors. We can become political actors ourselves, but then we're not policy analysts. It's okay. It's a separate function. And my goal was to try to, this might sound a bit overblown, but to identify a kind of critical policy analysis that can address these kinds of issues. I picked up a copy the other day of the International Review of Public Policy, and I was just astonished at how meaningless, how unimportant the papers in that journal were, a mainstream policy journal. All kinds of boxes and arrows and all about essentially nothing. On the other side, we have Critical Policy Studies Journal, of which I would like to think that this is related to, which is producing all kinds of critically important analytical perspectives on the contemporary problems that we confront around the world. And this is not to be written off, I would say, but it is also important to recognize that this in and of itself is not politics. I mean, it's sort of a personal politics, but this has to be part of a political movement, but a political movement has to be emerge organically. And then we could try to be something like Gramsci's organic intellectuals to try to develop ideas for this movement. But we are sort of stymied by the fact that the movement hasn't taken hold yet.